everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, I want to discuss pain play. I've made content before talking about how to create more bruises and marks during a scene, but sometimes that is not the goal. In fact, sometimes what you want is the exact opposite. Maybe you live with family or vanilla roommates you need to be discreet around. Maybe you have a job where you show a lot of skin and so you can't be marked up. Maybe you have a vanilla life partner you don't do kink with and they don't want to see reminders of what you do on the weekend without them. Or maybe bruises are simply triggering for you and you'd rather not see them. Whatever the reason, some folks want to have fun and not to leave any evidence behind. So for this video, I want to tell you how you can live out all of your pain-based fantasies while also reducing your risk for bruises and marks. Please use the content of this video responsibly. Now, first of all, I want to emphasize that I am only saying that these tips will allow you to reduce the overall risk of marking, not eliminate it completely. Nothing is ever 100% guaranteed to not mark except for not playing. But telling a bunch of kinky folk to not play if they don't want to have marks is about as effective as any other form of abstinence-only education. So instead, I think it's much more about understanding which risks you are willing to accept and where your boundaries are. For example, when someone says they don't want marks, that could mean one of several different possibilities. Maybe what they're really saying is that they don't want to have visible marks, i.e., marks that can still be seen even when one is reasonably covered up for the time of year and the setting. Or maybe they can't have bruises, but temporary indentations from rope marks would be okay. Now, what I want to talk about next are some things that I like to know when I'm trying to get a more accurate assessment of somebody's boundaries around marks. So number one would be, are you okay with marking on certain areas of the body but not on others? For example, no marks on the face is a pretty common limit, but a mark on the torso, which can be covered by a swimsuit or a t-shirt, is totally okay. Or is it that the entire body is off limits for all marking? Now, number two would be, what specific types of marks should be avoided? Would any of them be acceptable? A lot of people use marking and bruising as synonymous with each other, but bruising is really only one of many different types of marks one can have. You can also have broken skin, you can get welts, you can get indentations like I mentioned earlier from bondage, you can have scratches, you can have raised lines from knives or nails, you can get bite marks, even stains from things like makeup or markers or colored wax play candles. So consider how these things may present differently on different skin tones as well. Some will be less visible than others. Some marks, like the marks from cupping, can be more easily dismissed as part of massage or physical therapy, right? So if you do a cupping scene and somebody sees it because they leave kind of like round bruises, you can go, oh yeah, that. I tried this like new kind of cupping massage over the weekend. You know, like they had in the Olympics that one year. It was really relaxing, but the bruising left behind sure is funny, isn't it? Hopefully people won't get too suspicious when it seems more mundane and easily explained. Now, number three is to consider temporary versus permanent marking. Things like irritated, flushed, or indented skin can take a variable amount of time to return to normal, but almost always will within a day or two. Considering the fact that you may or may not be a healthy person and you may have different circulation issues, that might not always be true, but it's broadly accurate. Compare that to something like broken or bleeding skin, which can actually create scarring and can last for years or longer. This can be of particular concern if the person who is going to be scarred up is prone to keloid scarring. Do you need to have clear skin immediately after play, or is taking a few hours to a few days to return to normal acceptable? And finally, remember, you don't need to be doing a heavy sadomasochistic scene to leave marks behind. For example, kneeling on rice or on Legos while doing a punishment scene or doing service submission where you kneel could leave indentations or even bruising on certain people if done for long enough. So, be sure to carefully review the specifics of play you have in mind, especially if you have a very low risk tolerance for any kind of marking. So, I would also review activities like bondage, things like breath control, kneeling or being on all fours, crawling, fire play, electro play, pet play, wax play, rough body play, wrestling, and sensation play. I realize that sounds like it's basically all kinds of BDSM, but it's not quite. Each of these types of play has a chance to leave an impression behind, ranging from petechia around the eyes to burns and bruises. So, let's say that you've gone through those considerations I just mentioned, and you've decided you'd still really like to do some impact play, and getting a mark on an easily hidden part of the body is okay, but you'd still like to avoid any marks as much as possible. So, how can you do that? So there are a few steps you can take that you can apply to basically any form of impact play, from flogging to caning. Number 1 is make sure you properly warm up the skin. I promise, hold on, we are not doing just BDSM 101 here. We're going to go in depth for a second. If you've seen my earlier videos on making bruises, you know that one technique to ensure a really good mark is to strike firmly on cold skin. The stronger the better. So naturally, the opposite of this will also make you less likely to bruise, at least in most cases. So what does properly warmed up skin mean though? More than anything else, pay attention to this, it means not rushing. I know, you want to get to the juicy good bits, but it's important not to go too quickly, and I would argue a good warm-up is part of the good juicy bit. So a good warm-up to me looks like making sure the room is at a comfortable temperature. A shivering bottom will make a proper warm-up difficult to do, even if it's good for like an interrogation scene. Good for the ambiance in some cases. Also, if you have a massage table or a similar flat surface to use, consider adding a heating pad or a table warmer if you aren't able to control the ambient temperature of the room that well. Also, start slow and light with a broad, mild instrument. Think like a padded, furry paddle. Stick to that 1 to 2, maybe 3 out of 10 range. Then gradually escalate about every minute or so, maybe every 10 to 20 strikes, keeping pace with the bottom's pain threshold. If the pain suddenly jumps up to a 6, that means you need to step off on the gas for a minute. Even if you're hitting harder, it should stay roughly in the 1 to 3, maybe 4 range at the peak of intensity. This means you're going to have to do a lot of check-ins as you go along. I know this can be annoying, but when we're trying to avoid marks, we got to put some extra work in. I'd say you should do this for at least 10 minutes, ideally 20 if you want to be playing for, say, like 45 minutes to an hour. So if you want to avoid marks, you're going to have to pace yourself. Bottoms with pale skin will likely flush red or pink, no matter how softly you're going. It's me. I'm that bottom, which doesn't necessarily mean you're then gonna develop a bruise, so you can't always judge based off of that. And conversely, it can also be difficult to see a visual difference on darker skin tones, especially in typical dim dungeon lighting. The same is also true if the area of the skin is covered in colored tattoos. So a better indicator to go off of is going to be skin temperature. Does it feel warmer than the surrounding untouched tissue? If so, congrats! Your warm-up is working! Good job! Besides being a way to reduce the risk of marking, warm-ups are also a great time to connect, drop into your scene headspace, and check in on where you and your body and head are at before fully going into whatever play you had planned. If you thought something would be a 2 out of 10, and it feels like a 6 out of 10 no matter what you do, might need to put away the instruments for tonight and maybe plan on doing some more sensation play instead. Now, another key technique for impact play is going to be playing over clothing. This is actually a favorite of Spanko's. This includes doing the warm-up, with clothes on, as well as during the full scene. I find this makes the biggest difference with stingy toys like canes or evil sticks, though obviously it can also deaden the sensation, which is a trade-off you have to make. Because thuddy pain tends to travel deeper into the tissue, leaving less superficial marking, it is less impacted by somebody wearing clothing, though it can make a difference because most toys are not pure thud. Again, it's me. I'm that bottom. I love thud. If anything has a trace of sting in it, I can tell you. Now, for things like throat implements like floggers, it can also make a difference too. In my experience, at least, bruises from that kind of play tend to show up more like the day or two after versus immediately, which can be an unwelcome surprise. So thuddy play, you might want to put that on the table because of how unpredictable it is. Since every body is different and every toy is different, if you're aiming to have no marks at all, as the top, I recommend doing a patch test just in general as a good idea, but on yourself for this type of scene. Going over clothing on a discrete part of the body, you can see how the skin reacts to a single cane or paddle strike. You can also do this on the bottom as well if they're willing to accept the potential for any kind of mark happening, even during just a demo trial period. If your skin is already getting warm or irritated, it's probably best to save that toy for another time. But you don't always have to use toys to do impact play, right? Like I said, this is a favorite technique of Spanko's. If hand spanking is more your thing, you can further reduce the risk of marks by wearing soft, padded leather gloves. This will also take off more of that surface sting too. And no matter what kind of impact play you're doing, it's also advisable to avoid the same dang spot. During warm-up, we want to gradually introduce sensation to a wide area, so no matter where we strike, the skin is going to be prepared for it. But when we're doing a scene, we want to vary the area we strike, for example, going from the sit spot, kind of on the bottom of the butt, to the upper thigh, to the left cheek, to the right cheek, never hitting the exact same bit close together at time. Periodically go back to a softer sensation to make sure the whole area you are trying to strike stays warm. Check in often as well with the temperature of the skin. Marks are often the result of cumulative stimulation on the same area, so reducing the number of times a part is struck reduces the likelihood that that part will be damaged or irritated. Be mindful of impact play basics here too. It's always a good idea to keep those in mind. Now is not the time to get creative and see if it's actually fun to wrap your flogger on purpose. I promise, hitting the upper hip bone is not fun at all for most people, and it sure as heck is not going to suddenly mark less than the meat of someone's thighs or their back. Stick to the more cushioned areas of the body and keep those good rules of thumb in mind, like avoiding the joints and bony bits. So the bonier something is, the more likely it is to be damaged or at least bruised from impact. Again, it's not fun. Most people do not get anything bonus material sensation-wise out of hitting the bony bits. Maybe try it next time if you're really that curious. Now, another basic skill to be mindful of is the duration of your scenes. I've hidden this little tidbit deeper in the video so the brats and the masochists don't immediately click off. Especially if you need to avoid all bruises, I'm sorry to say, you are likely going to have to play for less time and with less intensity or time outside the warm-up phase at least. Like I was just saying, marks are often the result of cumulative stimulation on the same spot. So, if you're going over the same spot less because you've only played for 45 minutes and not for 2 hours, you are going to be less likely to bruise. That is just the basic math of how that works. But don't worry, I have lots of recommendations later on in this video for pain play you can do that has low to no risk of marking that you can use in longer scenes, as well as in more short, intense bursts if that's more your style. So, I'm sorry, brats. I'm sorry, masochists. The dangerous part of the video is over. Please continue to watch. So, I also recommend doing bondage or impact play, but not together. especially with rope bondage, where the restriction is not limited to just the wrists or the ankles like with most bondage devices. Hitting an area that is tied up makes that area more likely to bruise. There are many times I have taken a relatively mild strike in bondage that normally wouldn't bruise me, but it did because I was in bondage. And finally, as general advice for impact play, choose your toy carefully. A bruise-free scene is not the time to pull out your thinnest, nastiest cane or evil stick. I would avoid toys like whips, canes, wooden paddles, dragon tails, basically anything in the thin and stings like heck category. Whips in particular should be avoided since they are the most likely to accidentally break the skin, next to canes that is. The best toys for impact are soft, padded toys with some squish and give, especially wide toys that will spread the force of the strike out to a wider area. Think foam and leather rather than wood, silicone, or rubber. If you aren't sure if something will leave a mark, patch test it on yourself first, or patch test it on your partner if they feel comfortable with the chance of getting a single mark on a small area. So that's what you need to know about minimizing your risk of marking during impact play. But what about other forms of pain play? How can you get your sadomasochistic needs met with a very low risk of leaving marks behind? The first toy that comes to mind for me is a TENS unit. This electroplay toy staple can be a little on the pricey side, but it's well worth it if you want to do scenes without marks on a regular basis. With adjustable settings that can go from I don't feel anything to oh F that, you can dial it in with a level of precision you can't get from most other toys. Plus, no marks. And because it causes muscle contractions, it can lead to all kinds of hilarious scenarios if you're into emotional sadomasochism. Think not being able to keep your hand from twitching while you're trying to serve a simple glass of water. The potential there is truly limitless. But if you don't want to shell out for an expensive electroplay toy you might not even like, I totally get that. It would be a hard sell for me too. There are options that might not require you to spend any additional money at all, though. And that is where food play comes in. This could be in a more traditional, sensation-focused, put an ice cube on my nipple like it's a romance novel kind of way, but for this, I am more thinking of ways to use food that are painful. Now, I'm sure most millennials and Zoomers watching can remember the infamous SpongeBob hot sauce scene where Sandy pulls out SpongeBob's tongue and gets him to surrender just by threatening to pour out a single drop onto that tongue. Now, I'm not saying that you should recreate that entire bit in scene form, but I am saying it would be extremely funny if somebody did that. But you can just take that principle on its own and expand on it. Use a dental gag to force someone to take drips of hot sauce on their tongue. Force them to hold a cut onion in their mouth. Ones from farmers markets tend to be more intense than store-bought ones, by the way. Make them eat a whole durian or a cube of wasabi. That kind of thing. It can either be directly painful, like the hot sauce, or simply mentally repulsive. Either way works as torture. And speaking of ice, you can also use temperature play for mark-free torture too. I distinctly remember being made to hold my hands in an ice bucket as part of a science thing. Did anyone else do that? I don't know. It was very strange, but in any case, having to hold your hands in a bucket of ice water for a long period of time, that gets really uncomfortable. And it's easy to set up, it requires basically no additional equipment, and also leaves no trace behind. Now, next up, completely different area of kink altogether. Position training might not be the first thing people think of when they want to do pain play, but I think it has some potential. Hear me out, okay? You might have heard of mental bondage before. You know, where your partner goes, don't move, and you have to stand or kneel in the same spot until they release you with some kind of word or phrase. It's a similar idea to that, but you're doing poses that are uncomfortable. This could be holding your hands out in front of you or above your head without being allowed to cross them. You can also do this while kneeling, standing, or even sitting. And it doesn't take long for this to become painful. You can also get a similar effect by having to squat for long periods of time or having to do a wall sit. Again, another thing from childhood that weirdly has kink things that you can do with it. Does anyone remember having to do wall sits if you were in sports at all? I'm sorry to bring that torture back. Now, another common stress position is being made to bend forward like you're going to touch your toes and then having to wrap your arms around your upper legs and keep your nose to your thighs. Unless someone is very flexible, that is likely going to be very uncomfortable too. Now, all of these are a good solution for those who need something quiet and implement-free. I would say it's probably the best stuff you can do in kink when you need to have complete, total deniability on all different levels. Now, when it comes to pain play, the main areas of the body that most people go for tend to be the upper back, the butt, the thighs, and sometimes the chest. But there are so many more parts of the body that we can use to evoke intense sensation. Now, my personal favorites are the nose and the mouth. My love of nose hooks is well known at this point, and I've brought it up in a number of videos, but seriously, they are really fun, and even the slightest little pull on them can make your eyes water. And some tops who really like crying, you're going to enjoy it, trust me. Now, Shibari's study also has a great guide with a few improvised gag ideas, my favorite of which is the chopstick gag. If you love drool, definitely give that one a go as well. And if you want to be really mean, you can actually combine a few of these ideas together. Think chopstick gag plus nose hook plus wasabi equals a very fun, not so fun, torturous time. Sorry, not sorry in advance. I guess I did say that the bad part of the video was over. I lied. I'm so sorry for damaging your trust in me. Also, don't forget the Super XXXL plumping lip balm if you want some extra sting in there. And finally, one more classic I somehow haven't really mentioned yet is nipples. You can do all kinds of terrible things to nipples that don't really leave marks behind, from pinching to biting to play piercings and clamps of all different intensity levels. If you've never tried nipple play before because it seemed too vanilla or too basic and you skipped over it to go farther in your kink journey, why not go a few steps back and give it a try? It might seem basic, but it can be extremely, extremely intense. And with that being said, that is everything that I have to say today on impact play and not leaving marks behind. Thank you all so much for watching. I am very interested to see, did I miss any big categories here that you have done before? Any additional thoughts or suggestions? I would love to hear them in a comment down below. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this, you can go ahead and subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts, different kink and BDSM or related topics. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.